Welcome everyone to our first Lunch and Learn webinar, which is all about creating enabling environments and acting now for a dementia-friendly future. So we know it's Dementia Action Week this week, so we're really proud to be able to present to you this 30-minute webinar. My name's Kate Lamont, and I'm a registered occupational therapist, and along with Kathy Kirby, I am co-director at Thrive Aged Care Consultants. So our mission is to work with providers that provide care for older people to help create the right conditions for older people to thrive. And we do this in several ways, through training, education and mentoring, through service and review of programs, and also through the review of the physical environment that the care is provided in. So we believe that everyone should have the opportunity to thrive, and older people, regardless of the conditions of ageing, should also have the opportunity to thrive. So a little bit about this webinar today is really just to provide you with an introduction and to get you thinking about how the environment impacts on older people and those living with dementia. We'll discuss key environmental factors to consider, how the environment can affect mood and behaviour, and also we'll discuss some simple strategies that you can implement that don't require a lot of resources or funding. All the strategies that we discuss can be implemented across any environment. However, this webinar does have a particular focus on how these can be implemented in residential aged care. And that's really timely because I think it was last week or the week before, we had the draft guidelines for the National Aged Care Design Principles and Guidelines for Aged Care come out. So that's really timely that you guys can hear about that today. So before we start, let's have a think about what makes up our environment. And the environment includes all these elements: physical aspects, social aspects, cultural aspects, economic and political aspects. All these environment factors impact upon our motivation and how we perform activities. And today we will just be focusing on the environmental aspect. But it is important to know that these things do make up our environment. And before we talk about the environment, I'd just like to touch on how we take in information from our environment. And we do that through our senses. The information that we take from the environment directly impacts how motivated we are to engage in activity and what our performance in that activity is like. And so we take information in through these senses, through our sight, through our hearing, through our sense of smell, our sense of taste, our touch, our vestibular system, so our movement and our balance, which tells us where our head and body is in space. And we know that's necessary to stay upright, to sit down, to walk. We also take it through proprioception, so knowing where our body is in space, knowing where our head and our body is in relation to each other. And that's important because it gives us information on how much force we might need to do or use in certain activities, such as like cracking an egg. How much force do we need to do to crack that egg? I have got a little video that I wanted to show you, but I won't show you that now. I'll show you that at the end. But it is about how a person with dementia can experience the world. And this person, Agnes, talks about how her senses have changed with dementia. She talks about how her vision has changed and how it's impacting her daily activities. She talks about how her hearing has changed, and that's really significant. She describes her hearing being overstimulated. She talks about how her sense of smell and her sense of taste have changed. So I'll show you that at the end of today's presentation. But I think it's really important when we're considering the environment for older people and those living with dementia that we put ourselves in their shoes, because quite often the environment, is designed by younger people, people who, don't have cognitive impairment or dementia. So it's really important to remember who we're wanting to enable and to have a meaningful and full life and in that environment. When we think about senses and cognitive changes occurring in a person with dementia's brain, we're thinking about how they're taking in information, how they're processing that information. And, that can lead to us seeing certain responses or behaviours for that person with dementia. So things that we can see might be the person wandering, it might be the person being agitated, or, we're describing them as having aggression. They might be disruptive. They might be withdrawn, not wanting to engage in activities or social interactions. So, we can't change the way that information is being processed by their brains, but we can adapt the environment to have a more positive impact on supporting them to process information, to receive the information, and to navigate their environment. So the environment can really be a threat, or it can be an opportunity for someone living with dementia. And that really depends on what we do to support them in that environment. How can we support them to be more orientated in their environment, to be able to navigate themselves or around that environment, to be more independent in their environment, to have good sleep, to feel less stressed, to participate in meaningful activity, and to develop social connections. So how can we tailor the environment to help promote those things? So let's get back to thinking about what makes up the physical environment. And these are some of the key elements that do make up the physical environment. And we'll be touching on some of these elements, not all of these elements in this webinar, but some, just to get you thinking about what you can do to support older people and those living with dementia. Now, the strategies and the principles that we're talking about today can be applied to existing buildings. So we're going to be talking about things that you can do in your current facilities or current services. The first thing I want to start on is light. So light is really important for older people and those living with dementia. Our sight impacts our ability to interpret our surroundings. It impacts our ability to read visual cues, which might be, being able to see someone's face to read that cue, or looking at signs, or looking at other things that might prompt our memory. Our sight affects our ability to participate in activities, and it's also linked to safety. So sight is one of the most important senses to avoid danger, and there's also links to falls. A good lighting is really important. As we get older, our vision changes and we actually need more light to reach our retina. Our eye reacts more slowly and we need more time for our eyes to adjust to different lighting levels. So if we're going into bright or slightly dimmer or darker environments, our eye needs more time to adjust. And, it's really interesting that a typical 75-year-old, so someone who's 75 without cognitive impairment or dementia, actually requires twice the amount of light of a 45-year-old person to achieve the same performance. Okay, and then when we think about someone living with dementia and the other visual impairments that they might have related to that dementia, it makes it, so important why we actually need appropriate lighting in our environment. When it comes to lighting, the main considerations are bright, even light, promoting natural light, avoiding shadows and glares, making sure the lighting is appropriate to the time of day, and making sure it's appropriate to whatever activities you're engaged in. We know that older people need twice the amount of light. So again, bright light's really important to help people move around and participate in activities and socialise. And access to natural light is actually really important for our circadian rhythm, so our sleep-wake cycle, and even more so for people living with dementia, because people living with dementia need clear signals from the outside world to maintain their sleep-wake cycle. So it's important to have bright natural light during the day, especially in the morning, and making sure you have appropriate nighttime lighting. So at nighttime, minimising bright lights and using warm lights to help people navigate at night. Maintaining even light is also really important. We know that the older eye requires more time to adjust to different lighting levels, so maintaining even light really helps people and those with dementia to receive information for safety and participation. And you'll see one of these pictures on the slides is a corridor. Now, we know that light in corridor can be quite problematic, especially if that corridor doesn't have access to natural light. You know, we'll see dark patches or dim patches and quite often an inability to maintain even light. So this is where it's really important to either use natural light sources through skylights or even lighting throughout the corridor to maintain that even light. Now, while it's important to promote, access to as much natural light as possible and bright lights, it's also really important to consider managing glare and shadows. So glare is uncomfortable and it can be disorientating even for those not affected by dementia. And we can reduce and manage glare in a number of ways, such as making sure we have non-reflective surfaces or matte surfaces, and even spacing when we use lights. And choosing fixtures that hide the light source also helps to reduce glare. And one of the most important things to think about when you're putting lights into an aged care facility is making sure you're eliminating light and dark spots in a space and you're minimising shadows. So dark spots can feel very ominous to the brain and they might cause distress to residents. And even consistent lighting will help residents move more easily throughout their space. So just make sure lights are evenly spaced and that you're providing the right amount of light. Another important consideration with light is the use of tonal contrast. So people with dementia can have issues in colour vision and colour sensitivity. Contrast can be used to define objects and also to assist with orientation, and even just for people with dementia to, be able to know where something is and help them recognise what the object is. So the pictures of the bathroom on this slide really try to highlight how contrast can be used to define the environment. You'll see there's a white bathroom with a white toilet, and you'll see it's really hard to actually identify the toilet against the white wall. The other bathroom has a white toilet against a coloured wall, providing contrast so you can see the toilet. Furthermore, the toilet seat is of a dark colour, providing contrast so you can actually see the toilet seat. You can see the handle very clearly. You can see the basin against that coloured wall very clearly. So it really helps the person with dementia to be able to really easily locate that toilet, especially if they might be in a hurry to locate that toilet. And we know that, contrast, helping you be able to identify objects, helping you to be able to orientate yourself will reduce stress in people with dementia and enable them to participate in activities that they're able to participate in, not limiting them due to the environment. Light and activity is also something to consider. So have a think about what activities people are participating in and make sure you have the right light for when someone's performing a task. So, making sure you have bright light or direct light when someone is engaged in their personal activities, personal daily activities such as brushing their teeth or saving. You can see we've got an example here of using a lamp in a reading corner to provide more light. And then the example at the top is of a dining room, and you can see the different light sources being used as well as natural light in that space to really provide a bright light for people when they're eating or participating in activities in that room. So light is a really important consideration. I want to move on to sound, because sound is also a really important consideration. And sound is, you need to consider it when you're thinking about how it might impact the person wanting to be motivated to engage in an activity, and how it affects their performance and also their mood for someone with dementia. So have a think about yourself. Have you ever had to concentrate when you've been in a noisy environment before? It's extremely difficult for us to be able to do that, and it's even more difficult with someone with cognitive impairment or dementia. And dementia can affect sound for people in different ways. So you can actually lose the ability to interpret sounds if you have dementia. So it makes the amount, the type and the variety of sound that a person with dementia is exposed to even more important. We need to make sure we carefully regulate that, because we don't want to under-expose the person to sound or over-expose the person to sound, because it can cause confusion, illusions, frustration or agitation. Excess noise is also something to consider for people with dementia, because it can actually lead to overstimulation. And again, what we see is that response that we label as a behaviour. Okay. Now, when we think about sound, there's two basic sound sources. There's airborne sound and there's impact sound. So airborne sound travels through the air, it's our speech, it's music that's playing, it's maybe a bird outside chirping, it's an alarm going off. Impact sound is caused through footsteps, or when we move furniture, or when we slam doors, or when we slam bins, or when we hear that tea trolley being pushed down the corridor. And when we think about these sounds, we need to think about acoustics. So acoustics is just how the sound is transmitted around a room or environment. Okay, so some rooms with poorer acoustics, you'll really hear the sound travelling around the environment. And there's things that we can do to improve acoustics, so to absorb sound so it travels less around that environment. So we do need to realise that auditory stimulation, so too much sound, can lead to frustration, aggression, and what we label as disruptive behaviour. And it could, also cause the person wanting to withdraw from that environment to escape the noise. So sound is really important to consider. When we're thinking about sound, we need to think about minimising background noise, and that's through have a think about things that we've talked about already. People slamming doors, noisy tea trolleys, staff talking at workstations, residents talking, phones ringing, call bells, PA announcements, noisy appliances, maybe the dishwasher or the washing machine in the resident kitchen makes a lot of noise. The radio and the TV, these are all things that we need to consider as background noise. It's really important actually to manage the radio and TV very carefully in group environments, because it just provides another sound that people have to factor in, and it may limit their ability, to participate in the social activities that you're also providing. Creating smaller, quieter spaces is a really good strategy to manage sound. So rather than just have one large space where everyone, has lunch or participates in an activity, create smaller spaces that residents can gather. Yeah, so you can see in these images, we've got a really large clinical looking dining room with not a lot of home-like furniture that's going to absorb sound. So it's going to be a very noisy environment. And then down below, you've got a smaller setup. You've got a table of 4 where people can have their lunch, and you've got more furniture around that's going to absorb sound. Soft furnishings, I just mentioned, is a great way to absorb sound. So these include things like carpets, curtains, using couches and chairs and other soft furnishings to absorb sounds and improve acoustics. And, that also adds to a home-like environment. Now, There's some recommendations actually out of the draft guidelines on what sort of sound levels should be in different areas. So you can see 35 decibels for bedrooms, 40 decibels for common areas, and 45 for other areas. And you can see on the right there, we've got a little bit of a chart of different sounds and the actual decibel reading that they make. So it gives you an idea of how noisy things can really get. Now, there's a range of free different sound apps that you can download on your phone that help read decibel readings. And I'd really encourage you to do that, where you're working. Measure how loud does the dining room actually get when it's lunchtime? How loud is it around the nurses' station? How loud is it when we've got a group activity going on? And then start to think about that from your residents' views and those living with dementia. Wayfinding is something that is really helpful for people living with dementia and to navigate around your space. And it's not even just for people living with dementia, because we engage in wayfinding all the time. So wayfinding requires the ability to lay down and retrieve memories and to have spatial orientation, so to know where you are in space. But those cognitive abilities do decline with dementia. So when you go and park your car, let's just say at the shop, sort of big car park, have a think about the strategies that you put in place when you want to remember where your car is. Do you always park in the same place? Do you park near a certain shop so you can remember that I've parked on that shop? Do you remember the level that you've parked on? Maybe you take a photo so you can go back and look at it later. These are all wayfinding strategies that we do every day. Okay, so it's important to consider for residential aged care or even, hospitals, how we help people find their way around. And the way that people find their way around is through different strategies, such as signage, the use of landmarks, having line to sight, so being able to see where you want to go, personalising, so being able to connect with something because you know it's yours, and the use of colour. So if we look at these examples on the page, you'll see with this toilet example, we've got a bright red door, so we've got that contrast. We've got clear signage with the picture of the toilet, so it's really recognisable. We're not using symbols like the male-female symbol, which we're actually using the picture of the toilet for people to identify with. If we have a look up here with these door decals that allow people to personalise their doors in residential aged care, again, there's some wayfinding strategies being used there. So again, it's colour, but the doors are personalised and, normally they would be picked by the resident. The resident would have an association with that door. It might be very similar to a door that they've had throughout their life, so that they know that it's their front door that they're going to. Again, in that picture, you'll see that there's a little image on the side there that's similar to the use of a memory box or, just a bit of a picture that is meaningful for that person. So again, personalisation. The picture of the artwork here is an example of landmark. Okay, so it's a very bright, bold artwork of parrots. And what it does is it creates a pointer feature for people to remember. So when I see the parrots, I go left to find my room. So it's used as a landmark. These examples here I want to show you as well. There's two different corridors. The one below has a lot of different strategies in place for wayfinding. The one above doesn't. It's just a pretty basic corridor and, wouldn't necessarily be easy for you to find your way around. But below we can see the use of colours, so the doors contrast the walls. Down the end of the corridor, we can see a bright red wall with a bench seat and some artwork. This is a landmark. This tells people that my room is left or right of this space. Again, next to the doors, we can see a little shelf and people can put little mementos on this shelf that are meaningful to them. So it might be something familiar to them that they've brought from home or, something meaningful to them. Now, the example of the dining room over here provides a landmark through this picture and also line of sight. So with dining rooms or other communal spaces, it's really great that they've got, they can be partitioned, but they open up so you can have line of sight. You know what's happening in that room, the function of that room, and you can see it from the hallway, so you can get yourself there. Okay, there's some common strategies that we can use to improve wayfinding. Now, creating a home-like environment is really important for anyone in aged care, more so for those people living with dementia. A home-like environment helps us with orientation and wayfinding, but can also improve mood and reduce anxiety by creating a familiar environment. So imagine that you've struggled to remember where you're wanting to go or how to get there, and then the environment that you're in reminds you of a hospital or an institution. Your anxiety and your frustration would increase, and it might even lead you to demanding that you want to go home. And this is what we see sometimes with our residents. So it's important to create home-like environments, and by doing this, we can help reduce stress for our residents. So make sure any clinical equipment is put away as much as you can. Allow residents to bring in their furniture and their furnishings to personalise their rooms. Decorate common areas with artwork or objects that are reflective of your residents' cultures. So not just one culture, like, cultures. Have open shelving with familiar and home-like objects. And again, create those smaller spaces, and those smaller spaces that have your furnishings, your decorations, those sort of things, to create a home-like environment. There are so many benefits to using the outdoor space for older people and those living with dementia, and quite often in residential aged care, the outdoor environment actually gives us a bit more space to use, especially when we're trying to create those smaller spaces or quieter spaces for people with dementia. It gives us another option, okay? We know that accessing the outdoors does improve physical and mental well-being, and it has a direct impact on the mood of our residents and their behaviours, and also touching back on that circadian rhythm, and how important it is for that sleep-wake cycle. Now, I'm not going to go into discussing the outdoor environment in too much detail, because that's really another webinar in itself. But what I'd like to get you to think about today is, how often do you use your outdoor areas? How often are your residents outside? Okay. Can your residents access the outdoors independently? Can they open the door and get outside? If they can't, why not? And I want you to address that why. Have a think about why your residents aren't going outside as often as they should be, and what can you do to address that why. Now, in summary, we can't always control how people will respond or react, but we do have control over the environment and how the environment might trigger those responses. By putting in place the strategies that we've spoken about today, improving lighting, minimising noise, promoting wayfinding, creating a home-like environment, and getting people outdoors, we are going to have an impact, a really positive impact on older people's lives and those living with dementia. Now, at Thrive, we have some services around the environment. We support providers to look at their environment. We can conduct audits and reviews against the draft aged care design principles, so you're ready when they roll out. We can provide you with a full list of recommendations of minor and major modifications to improve your environment. We can even coordinate and project manage the implementation of those recommendations, and more importantly, work with your teams so that they're supported and those changes are embedded. Now, I would encourage you to go check out those draft National Aged Care Design Principles and Guidelines. I've got the link down the bottom of the resources page here for you to be able to go and do that. We might not have time to watch this video today, but I will include the link in an email that I send out to you all with today's recording, and I'd encourage you to go have a look and hear a little bit from Agnes about her experience of how her senses have changed with dementia. Thank you so much for coming along today. I'm going to stop the recording, but I'm going to hang on here and be available for any questions that you have.